This is my true story. I was a father who worked his whole life so my son would never sleep hungry. I built a business, paid his bills, and made sure he never felt the pain I did. But comfort made him cruel. After my surgery, when I tried to sit at his table, he looked at me and said, "Eat outside with the dogs." His wife laughed while I stood there silent. I didn't fight back. I just walked away because I already knew what tomorrow would bring. You won't believe what I did next. Before I tell you, comment where you're watching from and please subscribe so more people hear my story. I fed him when he was small. When there wasn't enough food, I gave him my plate and went to bed hungry. I carried bricks under the hot sun just to buy him school shoes. I patched the same shirt and wore it for years so he could have new ones. I worked in the rain, in the cold, through fever and back pain, all so he could live a life better than mine. Every meal he ate came from my sweat. Every dream he chased was built on my broken back. When he was young, he would smile and call me his hero. I remember the days he'd sit on my lap and say, "One day I'll buy you a big house, Dad." I used to believe him. I thought all my sacrifices would come back to me as love. I thought the child I raised would remember the man who raised him. But I was wrong. As he grew, he changed. The moment money entered his hands, respect left his heart. The boy who once thanked me for bread started complaining if the food wasn't fancy enough. The man I built became someone who looked down on me. The same man who used to eat from my hands now turned away in disgust if I sat beside him. When he took over the business, I didn't argue. I wanted him to lead. I told him, "You're the future now." He smiled, but there was pride in his eyes, not gratitude. He began treating the workers harshly, speaking to them the way no decent man should. I tried to correct him, but he said, "Times have changed, Dad. You don't understand how things work anymore." I said nothing. I kept quiet, thinking silence would teach him better than scolding. I believed that one day when life humbled him, he would remember the values I taught him: patience, kindness, respect. But instead he only grew colder. He started eating separately from me. When I sat at the table, he'd make excuses to leave. He stopped calling me Dad. He called me by my name, as if he was ashamed to be my son. His wife followed his example. She looked at me like I was a burden, not family. Even then, I didn't stop helping. When he struggled with the company's bills, I sold my land to cover his loans. When his car broke down, I used my retirement savings to repair it. I thought maybe love could fix disrespect. But love cannot fix pride. He forgot the days I walked barefoot to make sure he had shoes. He forgot the nights I went hungry so he could eat. He forgot who fed him when no one else would. I used to watch him from my chair, eating at that big table, surrounded by people who laughed at his jokes, drinking from glasses I bought, under a roof I paid for. And even then, I wasn't angry. I was proud that he had everything I didn't, but I never thought he'd use that comfort to humiliate me. Still, I stayed quiet, because that's what fathers do. We forgive even when it hurts. We wait even when it's hopeless. We believe our children will find their way back. But some lessons don't come with time. They come with loss. And the day he told me to eat outside with the dogs, I realized I hadn't raised a man. I had raised a mirror of arrogance, one that only reflected my sacrifices, never his gratitude. That was the night my patience died and my memory came alive. Because no matter how rich he became, he forgot one thing. Every bite of food that ever touched his mouth began with my hands. It happened just a week after my surgery. I was still weak, walking slowly, holding the wall for support. My doctor had told me to rest and eat well, but I didn't want to bother anyone. That evening, I came out of my room when I heard them laughing in the dining hall. The smell of food filled the air: rice, curry, and warm bread. My stomach ached, not from hunger, but from emptiness. I walked to the table and stood quietly near the corner, waiting for someone to offer me a seat. My son looked up, his face hard, his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" he asked. I said softly, "I just came to eat with you all." His wife smirked. "We already started," she said. "There's no space left." I looked at the table. There was space, more than enough. I had built that table myself when he got married. I reached for a plate, but he stopped me. His tone turned sharp. "Go eat outside," he said. I froze. "Outside?" I asked. "Yes," he said, looking straight into my eyes. "Eat outside with the dogs." "That's where you belong," his wife laughed, that fake, cruel laugh that burns more than fire. The sound of it stayed in my head long after the room went silent. I stood there, my hands shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to believe he was joking, that maybe I heard him wrong. But his face didn't change. His eyes were full of disgust, like I was something less than human. For a long moment, I said nothing. My throat was dry, my body weak. The food on the table blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. I nodded slowly and turned away. As I walked toward the door, the family dog followed me, tail wagging. I sat on the back steps, next to the old metal bowl where the dog ate. The night air was cold, the ground hard beneath my feet. The smell of food from inside the house made my stomach twist, but I couldn't take a single bite. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I gave him everything. And now he gives me this." The dog sat beside me quietly, resting its head on my knee as if it understood. It was strange. The animal showed me more kindness than my own blood. From inside, I could still hear laughter, plates clinking, glasses touching. My son's voice carried through the walls, talking proudly about business, about profits, about deals. I remembered the first time he brought home his first paycheck. He had cried then, thanking me for making him the man he was. Now, that same man couldn't even bear to share a table with me. When I finished sitting there, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just stood up slowly, went to my room, and closed the door behind me. My hands trembled as I leaned against the wall, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I saw not an old man, but a fool who gave everything and expected love in return. But even as my heart broke, my mind began to wake up. I remembered something he didn't, something that had been sitting quietly in a drawer for years. The papers, the ownership, the business that carried his name but still belonged to me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my bed, replaying his words over and over. "Eat outside with the dogs." Every time I heard it, the pain turned colder, sharper. But it also made me stronger. By the time the first light touched the sky, my decision was made. He had taken away my dignity for one night. The next morning, I would take away the empire he built on my name. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, the room cold and quiet, staring at my hands. These were the same hands that once fed him, wiped his tears, carried him when he was too tired to walk. Now, those same hands were empty, not because I had nothing, but because I gave him everything. The pain in my chest wasn't from the surgery anymore. It was from the memory of his words. "Eat outside with the dogs." The more I thought about it, the clearer things became. He had forgotten who he was talking to. He had forgotten that before he had a company, a house, or money, he had me. He had forgotten that every success he bragged about was built on my name, my effort, my decisions. The business he flaunted to the world, the one he called his, existed because I signed the papers that made it real. He thought I was powerless because I grew old. But age doesn't take away ownership. It only hides it in silence. I turned on the lamp and opened my old wooden drawer. It was full of things he'd forgotten existed. Old photos, tax records, partnership agreements, and at the bottom, the file that mattered most. The title deeds, business registration, and company transfer papers. His name was there, yes, but not alone. Mine sat above it. The founder, the true owner, the one whose signature still controlled everything. I ran my finger slowly across my name, remembering the day I signed it. I had told the lawyer back then to keep me as a major shareholder until I said otherwise. My son never cared to check. He only cared about his ego. He liked the title, not the truth. That night, I realized I had been quiet for too long. I had let him treat me like I was invisible, like I had no worth left. But I wasn't invisible. I was the foundation he stood on. And when the foundation moves, everything built on top of it falls. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to hurt him. But he had crossed a line no child should ever cross. There's a difference between forgetting and disrespecting. Forgetting can be forgiven. Disrespect must be remembered. I sat back in my chair and looked around my small room. The walls were cracked, the paint old, the furniture simple. But every piece of it was mine, bought with my own labor, not handed down. He might have lived in a mansion, but that mansion existed because of the business I built with these tired hands. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I felt awake. He had laughed at me at the table. He had looked at me like a burden. But the truth was, he was the one depending on me all along. His success, his luxury, his power, all of it came from me, and all of it could disappear with one signature. I picked up the file, placed it neatly on the desk, and stared at it for a long time. My decision was clear now. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to prove anything. I didn't even need to tell him. The papers would do the talking for me. The house was quiet. The only sound was the ticking of the clock and the faint breathing of the dog outside. The same dog he told me to eat with. The same one that had sat beside me in silence. I smiled bitterly and whispered, "Tomorrow, you'll understand what it feels like to be outside." Because sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's preparation. And the man he called powerless was about to show him what power really looked like. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. I didn't feel weak anymore. I didn't even feel angry. I felt clear, calm, focused. The decision had already been made in my mind hours ago. Now it was time to act. I made myself a small cup of tea and sat at the same desk where the folder lay. The papers looked ordinary, but they held the power to change everything. I opened them again, page by page, reading every word slowly. Each line was a reminder of how much I had built and how much he had forgotten. My name was still on every major document. Ownership, shares, licenses, everything tied back to me. When I had first handed him control years ago, my lawyer had advised me to keep my rights as a safety measure. Back then, I thought it was unnecessary. Now I thanked that man in my heart, because the safety he suggested had become my final protection. I didn't rush. I didn't call anyone. I wanted to be sure. I took out my glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, and rechecked every file. His name was there, but under mine. His signature followed mine. That meant one thing. He was only a managing partner. I was still the owner. He thought the company was his because he handled the day-to-day work. But paper doesn't lie. Paper remembers. I smiled faintly as I placed the documents in a small brown envelope. My hands didn't shake. My breathing was steady. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't want revenge that morning. I didn't want to see him hurt. What I wanted was justice. Quiet, clean justice. I wasn't going to yell or fight. I wasn't going to argue about respect or beg for love. Those things, once lost, can't be forced. But power? Power can be taken back. I opened the old drawer next to me and found my phone book, the one filled with numbers written in my handwriting from a time before smartphones. I flipped through it until I found the one name I needed, my lawyer. The same man who helped me register the business all those years ago. The same man who told me, never hand everything to anyone, not even family. Back then, I had laughed at his words. Now I understood them. I folded the envelope carefully, tied it with a rubber band, and placed it beside the phone. I didn't call immediately. I just sat there, listening to the house. It was silent, except for the sound of the dog's paws moving near the door. I looked at it and whispered, "You and I ate together last night, my friend. But tonight, the table will turn." The clock hit 9. I picked up the phone and stared at the number for a moment. I thought of all the years I had worked, all the nights I stayed awake worrying about his future, all the times I thought love would be enough. It wasn't. Then I dialed. The ring barely lasted 2 seconds before a familiar voice answered. "Sir?" my lawyer said, surprised. "It's been a long time." "Yes," I said calmly. "It's time to finish something I started." He paused. "What do you need me to do?" I looked at the envelope, my name printed in black letters across the front. I want the company transferred. Today. Don't tell him yet. Just make it clean, legal, and final. He hesitated for a second, then said, "Understood, sir. I'll start the process immediately." I hung up the phone slowly and leaned back in my chair. The plan was set. There would be no shouting, no fight, no argument. Just paperwork. The same weapon my son never learned to respect. As the morning sun filled the room, I smiled for the first time in a long while. It wasn't joy, it was peace, the kind that comes when a father finally takes back what he built with his own 2 hands. I waited until the clock struck 10. My lawyer never failed me in 40 years, and I knew he wouldn't now. The phone sat on the table in front of me, silent but heavy, like it carried the weight of everything I had lived through. When it finally rang, I picked it up before the second ring. "Sir," he said, his voice steady, "I reviewed the documents. Everything is exactly as you said. You still own full control." He was never the legal owner. I nodded quietly. "Good. Then do what we discussed. Transfer the company?" he asked, just to confirm. "Yes," I said slowly. "Transfer every asset, every account, every license. Effective today." "To whom?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "To someone who still knows how to say thank you." There was a pause on the line. He didn't ask questions. He knew me well enough to understand that when I made a decision, it was final. "I'll prepare everything within the hour," he said. "Make it clean," I replied. "No noise, no warnings. He'll find out when it's done." When I hung up, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel guilty. I felt the kind of peace that only comes when silence finally speaks for you. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let out a slow breath. The rest of the day moved quietly. The sun climbed higher, the sounds of traffic echoed faintly outside, and I just sat there, watching light fall across the old wooden floor. At noon, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from my lawyer. "Transfer complete. You're the sole owner again. All access revoked. Accounts frozen." I read the message twice, then set the phone down. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I simply whispered, "It's done." The same phone he once used to call me useless had now delivered the message that ended his arrogance. By afternoon, the first cracks had already started showing. His secretary called, her voice trembling. "Sir," she said, "your son's accounts aren't working. He's shouting in the office." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I imagined the scene clearly. My son pacing around, slamming his hand on the desk, calling the bank, yelling at people who once obeyed his every word. The computers would deny access. The managers would be confused. The board members would stay silent. Because on paper, everything belonged to me again. That's the thing about pride. It never checks the details until it's too late. By evening, I received another message. "All transitions are verified and sealed," my lawyer wrote. "Your son's authority is officially nullified." I turned off my phone and walked to the window. The sky was turning orange, and the first cold wind of the evening brushed across my face. Somewhere out there, he was realizing what he had lost. Not just money, not just power, but the respect of the man who built his world. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the sunset in silence. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt balanced. Like something unfair had finally been set right. Later that night, I sat in the dark again, the same way I had the night before. Only this time, the weight on my chest was gone. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had once built his future, and I whispered, "You may have told me to eat with the dogs, but you forgot one thing. I owned the table." Then I smiled faintly and turned off the light. Tomorrow, the world would know what happened. But tonight, it was enough that I did. By morning, the storm had begun. My phone started buzzing before sunrise. Calls from his office, his staff, even one from the bank. I didn't answer any of them. I already knew what they were calling about. Everything had changed overnight. Every account, every license, every contract now sat under my control again. He didn't see it coming because pride makes people blind. At 8, my neighbor called. "Your son's business building looks like chaos," he said. "People are shouting outside." I thanked him quietly and hung up. Then I sat back in my chair, calm, steady, and listened to the sound of justice working on its own. By 9, he finally called me. His voice wasn't calm this time. It was sharp, panicked. "Dad, what's happening?" "My accounts are frozen. The office says they can't reach anyone." I didn't respond. I just let him talk until he realized I wasn't going to save him this time. He hung up angrily, still not understanding that the man he had humiliated the night before was the same man who still owned everything. By noon, he came storming into my house. He didn't knock. He never does. He burst into the room shouting, "What did you do?" His face was red, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Everything's gone, Dad. The company, the money, everything. You can't do this to me." I looked up from my chair and met his eyes. "I didn't do anything to you," I said calmly. "You did it to yourself." He froze, unsure what to say. He was used to me shouting, begging him to listen. But now I was quiet, and that scared him more than any anger could. "You said I should eat with the dogs," I said slowly. "So I gave you the freedom to live like a man without my hand feeding you." He started pacing, running his hands through his hair, muttering under his breath. "You don't understand, Dad. I have bills to pay, employees waiting, deals pending." I interrupted him softly. "You have lessons waiting." He stopped and stared at me. For the first time, he didn't look angry. He looked lost. Completely lost. His wife wasn't with him this time. I had heard she packed her bags and went to her parents' house that morning. The fancy car he used to drive was parked crooked outside, almost empty on fuel. His empire had fallen in less than 24 hours. "Dad, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I'll fix everything. I'll make it right. Just give me another chance." I stood up slowly and walked toward the window. The same dog he told me to eat with was lying under the tree outside, sleeping peacefully. "I gave you everything," I said quietly. "Food, love, respect, a business. You could have had all of it forever if you gave just one thing back. Kindness." He didn't reply. He just stood there, breathing heavily, his eyes filling with tears. By that evening, the news had already spread. His investors pulled out. The staff resigned. The suppliers refused to deliver goods. Without my name attached to it, the business was worthless. Every deal he'd made, every promise he'd given, gone. He had built his pride on borrowed bricks, and now those bricks had been taken back. That night, I sat outside on the porch watching the sky turn dark. I didn't smile. I didn't laugh. I just stared at the horizon, feeling the air grow colder. Inside the house, he was still pacing, calling people, trying to save what couldn't be saved. By midnight, the calls stopped. His phone battery died. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from realization. That was the night he finally understood what real hunger felt like. Not hunger for food, but hunger for respect, something he had thrown away without a second thought. The next morning, I heard a knock at the door before sunrise. It wasn't loud. It was desperate. Slow, weak, almost trembling. I knew who it was before I even opened it. My son stood there, hair messy, eyes swollen, clothes wrinkled. The man who once bragged about his suits and cars now looked like someone who hadn't slept all night. He didn't speak at first. His lips moved, but no words came out. When he finally did, his voice cracked. "Dad, please. I have nothing." I looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, just silence. He had called me powerless. He had told me to eat outside like an animal. And now, here he was, begging for food at my door. He fell to his knees right there on the porch. "Please," he said again, his voice shaking. I didn't mean it. I was angry. I didn't think his hands were trembling as he spoke, his eyes full of fear. The kind of fear that only comes when a man loses everything. I stepped outside and looked at the sky. The morning light was pale, cold, like the world had already moved on without him. For a moment, I remembered the little boy he once was, running through the yard, smiling when I brought him candy after work. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He reached for my leg like a child again. "Dad, please forgive me," he said. "I haven't eaten. I don't know what to do." The irony hit me like a slow echo. The same man who once told me to eat outside with the dogs was now hungry himself, asking for a bite from the same hands he rejected. Life has a strange way of teaching respect, sometimes with hunger, sometimes with silence. I turned to him and said quietly, "You remember what you told me that night?" He looked down, ashamed. "Yes, Dad," he whispered. "I didn't mean it." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said, "because now it's your turn to understand." He looked up, confused, his eyes wide. I pointed toward the backyard, where the same dog sat wagging its tail, waiting for breakfast. "Go," I said softly. "Eat outside with the dogs." He froze, his mouth open, but no words came out. The silence between us said more than anything ever could. He finally realized what humiliation felt like. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I wanted him to feel what he had made me feel. Tears filled his eyes. "Dad, please, don't do this." I shook my head. "I didn't do this." "You did. The world is just giving you back what you gave." Then I closed the door slowly. I didn't slam it. I didn't shout. I just turned and walked back inside. Through the window, I could see him still sitting there on the steps, crying quietly. The dog came up beside him and rested its head on his arm, the same way it had done for me that night. The same kindness he lacked was now shown to him by the very creature he once compared me to. He stayed there for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe more. When he finally stood up, he didn't look like the man who once walked with pride. He looked small, defeated, human. That day, he learned what hunger really means. Not the kind that empties your stomach, but the kind that empties your pride. And as I watched from inside, I realized something. I hadn't just taken away his business. I had taken away his arrogance. He had been rich in money but poor in heart. Now maybe he could learn what real wealth looked like. For the next few days, he didn't come around. The house stayed quiet, the phone didn't ring, and the air felt lighter than it had in years. But I knew he was out there somewhere, facing the kind of truth that can't be avoided. Pride doesn't die in one night. It breaks piece by piece, until there's nothing left to hide behind. Neighbors told me they'd seen him sleeping in his car outside his old office. The same building he once called his now had a new owner. People walked past him without a glance. Some who used to smile at him now crossed the street. It's strange how fast people disappear when the money runs out. He tried calling a few friends, the ones who always surrounded him when things were good. None of them answered. One of his business partners even blocked his number. He finally learned what it feels like to be alone, truly alone. I sat on my porch every evening, watching the sun go down, remembering all the nights I had worked late to give him everything. Now he had nothing, and I felt peaceful. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I knew this was the only way he'd ever understand what respect means. On the fourth day, he showed up again. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He had lost weight in just a few days. "Dad," he said softly, "I'm sorry." His voice didn't sound proud anymore. It sounded human. "I was wrong. I treated you like nothing. I forgot who you were." I let him stand there for a while. I wanted the silence to sink in. Then I said, "You didn't just forget who I was, son. You forgot who you were." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I've been sleeping in my car. I haven't eaten properly since that day." I looked at him carefully. "Now you know how hunger feels," I said quietly. "It doesn't just live in the stomach. It lives in the soul." He didn't answer. He just stood there, defeated. I walked back into the house and came out with a plate of food. I handed it to him, but I didn't invite him inside. "Sit on the porch," I said. "Eat here. Think about everything you said to me. Then ask yourself if that's the man you want to keep being." He sat down without arguing. He ate quietly, not a single complaint. Every bite was slow, thoughtful. He wasn't just eating food. He was swallowing his pride. When he finished, he looked up at me and whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Those words, simple, honest, humble, were worth more to me than any company or fortune. He stayed for a while after that. We didn't talk much. He helped me fix the gate, cleaned the yard, and sat beside me in silence. It wasn't the same as before, but it was better than the emptiness we had before that. He was learning, step by step. That night, I thought about everything. How easy it is for success to blind people. How comfort can turn gratitude into arrogance. I had worked all my life believing that giving my son everything would make him happy. But I forgot the most important rule. If you give someone everything, they stop knowing the value of anything. Now, he finally knew. He had lost the business, the money, the friends, but he found humility. He found respect. And that was a lesson no school, no book, no fatherly advice could ever teach. Sometimes, a man must go hungry to remember who once fed him. After that day, the house became quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence anymore. It wasn't heavy with pain or shame. It was calm, peaceful. My son didn't come every day, but sometimes I would see him walking by in the evenings, heading to the small shop down the road where he'd found part-time work. No more expensive suits, no gold watch, no car, just plain clothes, dusty shoes, and a tired but honest walk. And for the first time, that sight didn't make me sad. It made me proud. He had stopped pretending to be someone he wasn't. The arrogance that once filled his eyes was gone. When he saw me sitting on the porch, he would nod gently, sometimes wave, and keep walking. He didn't need to talk much. Respect doesn't always need words. Sometimes it lives in silence. I stopped checking on the business. I didn't care about it anymore. I had taken it back not to use it, but to make a point. Money was never the lesson. Dignity was. The empire he lost meant nothing to me. The man he was becoming again meant everything. At night, I would sit outside and listen to the sounds of the street. The wind, the crickets, the soft hum of life moving forward. I remembered all the shouting, the humiliation, the cruelty of that night. He told me to eat with the dogs, and I realized something simple. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't destruction, it's peace. The kind that comes when you stop fighting and simply let truth do your work. One afternoon, my son came by again. He didn't look broken this time, just quiet. He sat beside me without asking, and we both watched the sun sinking behind the hills. After a few minutes, he said softly, "I understand now, Dad. Everything." I didn't look at him. I just kept my eyes on the horizon. "What did you understand?" I asked. "That respect is worth more than comfort," he said, "and that silence is louder than shouting." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Then you've learned what I couldn't teach you with words." He smiled faintly. It wasn't the proud smile I used to hate. It was the kind that comes from humility. Then he said, "Thank you for doing what you did. You didn't destroy me. You saved me. I didn't respond. I didn't need to." He knew the truth. When he left that evening, he didn't drive away. He walked, slowly, under the fading light, hands in his pockets, head bowed slightly. And in that moment, I felt something deep in my heart. Not pride, not victory, but relief. The silence that followed him was no longer empty. It was full of peace, full of meaning. That night, I sat in my chair and thought about everything. I didn't hate him anymore. How could I? He was still my son. And deep down, I knew he had finally learned the one lesson every man must learn before it's too late. That respect for others keeps you human, and disrespect will always take everything away. He took my dignity once, and I took his business in return. But in the end, neither of those things mattered. What mattered was what grew in the silence that followed. Understanding. That silence healed what shouting never could. It's been months since that night, and peace has settled into my home again. The world outside moves fast, but my days are slow, simple, and quiet. I wake up early, feed the dog, make tea, and sit on the porch watching the light spill across the yard. The anger that once burned in my heart is gone. It left the same day my son learned his lesson. He visits sometimes. Not every day, not out of guilt, but because he wants to. He brings bread, fruit, sometimes even a few rupees from the small job he's taken at the factory. He doesn't come in fancy clothes anymore. He comes as a man, humble, steady, and grateful. When he arrives, he always greets me first, touches my feet, and says, "How are you today, Dad?" Those words mean more to me than all the money he ever made. Because now, when he speaks, there's respect in his voice. Real respect. Not the kind that comes from fear, but from understanding. We sit together on the same porch where he once made me cry. We eat in silence, sharing the same food, under the same sky. The dog sits near us, tail wagging, and sometimes my son bends down to feed it with his own hands. Every time he does that, I see the boy I raised. Not the proud man who once forgot me, but the child who used to wait by the door for me to come home from work. I never remind him of what he said that night. I don't need to. Life already did that for me. Some lessons don't need to be repeated. They live in memory. The company is still in my name, but I don't run it anymore. I told him if he ever wants it back, he'll have to earn it the right way, through honesty, patience, and humility. He agreed. No arguments, no shortcuts, just quiet determination. Sometimes, when I watch him leave after our meal, I think about everything we went through, the humiliation, the silence, the downfall, and finally, the understanding. If someone asked me whether I regret selling his business, I'd say no. I didn't sell it to destroy him, I sold it to rebuild him. Because sometimes love isn't about protecting someone from pain. It's about letting pain teach them what love failed to. He told me once, "Dad, I thought you ruined me that day." I smiled and said, "No, son. I saved you. You just didn't know it yet. Now he knows." He said, "Eat outside with the dogs." And for one night, I did. But the next day, I reminded him who bought the food, who built the house, who paid for the table, and who raised the man that forgot his manners. I didn't destroy him. I restored the balance. Today, when he looks at me, I see no anger, only respect. The kind that can't be forced. The kind that's earned through loss and realization. He used to call me powerless. Now he calls me father again. And that, to me, is victory. He told me to eat with the dogs. The next day, I sold his business and left him begging for food. Final thought. He gave me a seat outside, so I took away the table.